Hi, my name is Rebecca Keeves. I'm a barrister at Cornwall Street Barristers in Birmingham, and I'm a recently appointed Deputy District Judge. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my route to the bar, which is often considered an alternative or non-traditional route, and it may be of help if you are struggling with pupillage or are concerned about the ongoing availability of pupillage following the COVID-19 crisis that we are currently in. So, a little bit about me. I was the first generation of my family to go to university, and I was indeed the first person in my immediate family to go. I went to a large state comprehensive school where the careers advice was somewhat lacking, and therefore I felt somewhat in the dark when deciding which university to go to, what to study. I knew I wanted to be a barrister, but I had heard mention that it might be worth doing a non-law degree and then converting thereafter. So that's what I did. I went to Coventry University and I undertook a BA in history and psychology with honours, and I then went on to study the graduate diploma in law and the bar vocational course at the College of Law. I was called to the bar in 2010, and I am a proud member of the Honourable Society of Lincoln's Inn. I then started working as a solicitor's agent with LPC Law. That's a self-employed role with LPC Law acting as an agency. It is an excellent way to gain advocacy experience, and I was in court almost every day. I did that whilst I continued my search for pupillage, which did not go well. I had one interview and it seemed to be going very well, and then they said to me, "We have other people with similar experience to you. Why should we pick you?" And I was silent. I had no self-confidence and a complete inability to go into an interview and sell myself. So I had to make a decision. Did I give up trying to become a barrister, as so many of my colleagues from the bar vocational course had done and had chosen to go on to something else? Or do I find another way? And I decided to find another way. I knew that a career at the bar was what I wanted, so I wasn't going to give up without giving it a jolly good fight. The first step was to identify what the issues were. The first was a poor academic record, and the second was my crippling lack of confidence. So what could I do about those things? Well, when I say poor academic record, I got a 2-2 on my undergraduate degree, I got a pass on the graduate diploma in law, and I got a competent on the bar vocational course. It was really no surprise that I was having little to no luck securing a pupillage. But I knew that those grades were not reflective of my academic ability. Rather, they were a reflection of the difficult personal circumstances I was going through during that time. So I decided to do a master's, and I commenced an LLM in legal professional practice, specialising in commercial law, in which I obtained a distinction. And I thought that that would help, that I could continue to apply for pupillage, and I could say, these are the reasons that my previous academic ability looks poor, but I've got a distinction in a legal master's. Clearly, you must realise now that I am capable academically. I also changed my job. It was to my financial detriment, but I went from being self-employed to an in-house advocate with a national solicitors firm. I worked in their advocacy department, and I also, within that role, had the opportunity of doing a lot of advice writing. So that was, for me, a gap. in my experience. I had a lot of advocacy experience and I didn't have a lot of advice writing or drafting experience. And I was reminded that in my interview I was asked, well, why should we take you over other people who've worked with LPC and have a lot of advocacy experience? And so I thought, well, that will give me a nice answer should I ever be asked that again. But I still wasn't getting any interviews, and I needed to make a decision about how I was going to proceed. By this point, I was 4 years post BVC, and I needed to think about some alternatives. I knew that a solicitor with both higher rights, who had been called to the bar, could gain an exemption from pupillage. So I thought, if I do the LPC part-time, then a training contract, and then my higher rights, I could get my pupillage exemption and go back to the bar. There were a few things that I didn't like about that, which I'll come on to. But I decided to start the LPC, and as I was doing so within 5 years of finishing the bar, I gained exemptions, and I only had to do, and therefore pay for, 54% of it, which was very helpful. I combined it with a master's because that was free at that point, and having already done an LLM, I opted to do an MSc in law, business and finance, and it was really hard. I have no doubt that it was very much my LPC marks that pulled up the overall score, but I walked away from that course with a distinction. I didn't want to spend 2 years doing a training contract. That was the problem with that route for me, for a couple of reasons. One, I didn't want to be a solicitor. I'd worked in a couple of solicitors' firms, and I think there's a personality type and a certain skill set you require to be a solicitor that is different from being a barrister. And I didn't like it, and I don't think I was very good at it. Having done that work, I think it means that I'm able to create a very special type of relationship with solicitors, because I can understand the pressures and strains that they're under during that period when they are case handling any case that I'm appearing on, and the numerous other cases they will be trying to juggle at the same time. The other issue with doing it, of course, is that I had fought very hard to try and get a pupillage. I had seen other people get pupillages who maybe didn't particularly care, and that was very, very hard. So I didn't want to then take a training contract opportunity away from someone who really wanted to be a solicitor. There aren't infinite numbers of these opportunities, and so I wanted to think very carefully about the choices I was making in respect of that. So I looked into it a bit further, and I found that if you were a fellow of CILEX, the Chartered Institute of Legal Executives, then you were exempt from completing a training contract. So how was I going to do that? Well, CILEX has different levels of membership, depending on whether you've done any other education or qualifications. Having been called to the bar, I started as a graduate member, which is one below a fellow, which is what I was aiming at. In order to progress from graduate member to fellow, I had to complete 3 years of qualifying employment, 2 of which had to be whilst I was already registered as a graduate member, and I had to create a portfolio of work, which they specify what it is they're looking for. And this seemed pretty perfect. The LPC was going to take me 2 years because I was doing it part-time, so I could use my previous work for the year before as qualifying employment, and then the following 2 years whilst I was doing LPC to build my portfolio. So my LPC would finish at the same time I was ready to submit my portfolio to CILEX. So I registered as a graduate member and carried on working. But you'll remember at this point I was in an advocacy job. Now, it is possible to complete the portfolio for CILEX in an advocacy role, but it isn't geared towards that. It's much easier to produce the type of work that you need if you're in a case handling role. So I changed jobs and I became a case handler with some advocacy, but not as much as I was used to, and certainly not as much as I would like. I did that for the requisite period. I put together my portfolio, which is no small task, and I became a fellow of CILEX. But what about higher rights? Well, I was surprised to learn that you don't have to be qualified as a solicitor in order to do your higher rights. You can do them whenever you want. So I did them the summer before I was due to qualify, which meant they were essentially in the bag, ready to go, and it could all be dealt with by the regulator together when the time came to register. You can do your higher rights with a course, but through financial restrictions and lack of annual leave in my job, I didn't have that option. So I did the higher rights just doing the exams. That was a little bit risky, especially with criminal higher rights, but I managed to pass them both. But if you wanted to do the courses, then that's of course something that you can do. So timeline-wise, what this meant was, in February 2018, I became a fellow of CILEX. As soon as I got that, I sent it off to the SRA with my higher rights certificates, my application for exemption from a training contract, and confirmation I'd completed the PSC. Don't forget that. I didn't realise it was something I still had to do. It wasn't something that I was even aware of. It came up during a conversation on the telephone with either CILEX or the SRA, so I was very lucky to have found that out. But you do still have to do the PSC, albeit that you may well have exemptions from part of it. So I sent all that off at the end of February. In April 2018, I became a solicitor with higher rights in crime and civil law, and about 3 weeks later, I obtained my pupillage exemption, and I immediately started with Cornwall Street Barristers, having been offered a conditional tenancy about a year before, and as my first choice set, I was absolutely over the moon. Having obtained my practicing certificate in May 2018, 8 years after being called, it would be fair to say I felt a bit behind. A lot of people suffer with imposter syndrome, even if they've gone the traditional route. And I did. Not as badly as I thought I would, to be honest. My additional experience that I gained before my practicing certificate meant I hit the ground running. I could go straight in with fast tracks. I was doing work in the Crown Court when I used to do crime. But there was a niggling feeling. And I thought I just got to get over it. I've just got to put it behind me. I've just got to move on. And then the JAC advertised for their deputy district judges, with applications opening around March 2019, which was of course less than a year after I obtained my practicing certificate as a barrister, or in fact a solicitor, and just after a year since I gained my practicing certificate as a fellow of CILEX. And you have to be qualified for 5 years, right, if you're going to apply to be a judge? That is correct, and I could therefore have presumed that I couldn't apply. But I didn't make that presumption, and I didn't ask other people. I did the research, and I went through the regulations, and it said this: if you gained an exemption from pupillage, the eligibility time starts from when you were called to the bar. So that was 8 years ago at that point. So I applied. Did I think I would get it? No, of course I didn't. I thought I would gain experience with the application process and that would help me in the future when I made further applications to be appointed to the judiciary. But then my application was accepted, and then I passed the first exam, and then I passed the second exam, and then there were eligibility checks and questions coming at me from the JAC to clarify points. And then my referees told me that they'd been asked for references. And then I was invited to an assessment day, which I had to ask the JAC to change because I had a fact find which had already been adjourned twice, and I wasn't prepared to either ask the court to adjourn it again for my convenience, or put my client through further delay, or alternatively having to seek other counsel when I had been working with her, and it was a very sensitive matter. So my assessment day ended up being right at the end of the period of assessments that they do. So I went down to London, I did the assessment day. It was long and it was scary. There are role-playing exercises which I felt the most comfortable with. I do a bit of Amdram, and of course it's in the courtroom setting essentially, so it's very much in my comfort zone. But then there was the interview, and I felt like I was back in that one pupillage interview that I had. It's very example based, and I felt that every example that I gave, they asked, yes, but what did you do? And how did you change that situation? How did you progress that matter? How did you affect that? I came out of that interview, I phoned my best friend, and I told him that I thought I'd blown it. But it turns out I hadn't. Yes, I had done various qualifications. Yes, I'd gained a lot of experience. But what had really changed for me was the confidence and overcoming the fear of looking like a fool. And I think this is really important, because if you try and be neutral on everything, you end up being a bit beige, and no one will remember you. I didn't like who I was, and that is something that I'm still working on to a certain extent. But what I have done is learn not to hide who I am. When I went into that interview at the JAC, when I went into the interview with Cornwall Street Barristers, I put myself in the mindset of thinking, well, if they don't want me, as me, who I am, then that isn't the right place for me. That if I got the tenancy or I was appointed pretending to be someone else, then I wouldn't be happy. So I would be me. And if I wasn't right for them, then they're not right for me. And I think that's the biggest thing I've taken from my experience. Have confidence in who you are. Have confidence in what you know you can achieve. I was told that I wouldn't make it. And I understand why people who purely looked at my academic record would say that. But I know that that wasn't a true reflection. So I had to have confidence in my own ability. And not only my own ability, but who I was as a person. Now, this route might be a little outdated now. The regulations, the options are constantly changing. So by all means use my method, but don't necessarily use my means. For example, the super exam is coming in September. So it may be that you don't need to do the legal practice course, and it may be that you don't need to become a fellow of CILEX, because it might be you can do the super exam and use your work experience to qualify as a solicitor that way. I don't know. Look into it. Explore the options. Do research. The information is out there. It might not be in a nice little here's to become a barrister without a pupillage bundle, although I'm doing my best. But you need to like research if you're going to go into this job. So go and do the research. Don't waste your opportunities, and don't wait for the opportunities to fall in your lap. So the girl with the tutu and no confidence is now a woman with a successful career at the bar and has been appointed as a deputy district judge. If I can do it, you can do it.